All right, man, peace. You know, brothers, one of my favorite movies back when I was a young boy back in the 1990s was a film called Forrest Gump starring Tom Hanks. And one of the things that amazed me about that movie was the way in which the director, I believe it was Robert Zemeckis, was able to interweave all these pivotal moments in recent American history around the life of this mentally challenged dude from Louisiana by the name of Forrest Gump, played by Tom Hanks. I thought that it was a beautifully executed film. But part of the charm of the character of Forrest Gump is that he would remember pivotal events in his own way. And that brings us to Mr. John Salley. John Salley, he makes appearances on the Vlad TV show. And he's always misrepresenting how events actually occur. And you could tell, there are just certain people that you listen to them tell a story, and you could tell they were there, but they're giving you their version of the events for one of a possible few reasons. Number one, they were high. Number two, they're currently high. Number three, they were drunk. Number four, they're currently drunk. Or number five, they're just not that swift. And lastly, they just want to put their own little comedic spin on shit. When it comes to John Salley, we know that he's a vegan. We also know that he's an avid weed head. So you never know exactly the reason why he says certain things. It is semi-refreshing to hear him say what he says at times because you know that he's being quote-unquote honest. But there's a difference between being honest and being truthful. Honesty is when you tell your beliefs as you see them, even if they're erroneous. Truthful is when you state what actually occurred. Well, John Salley decided that he was going to make an appearance on Vlad TV and make an assertion that I won't even say is really controversial. That being that a lot of the player rivalries from the late 80s and early 90s was a bit overblown. I've always stated that a lot of the so-called rivalries between players was overblown. It was far more contentious and cantankerous back then than it is today, no doubt about it. But this notion that none of the players were friends is just nonsense. Isaiah Thomas, Magic Johnson, Dominique Wilkins, they would all work out together in the offseason. Michael Jordan and Charles Barkley were very good friends. Scottie Pippen and Karl Malone were very good friends, so on and so forth. But once again, John Salley has stated that the so-called rivalry between the Pistons and Bulls was overblown. And he says this because, according to him, he used to hang out with Michael Jordan back in the 1980s. Michael Jordan appeared on his little cable TV show. And he also says that he would trade tickets with Scottie Pippen and Horace Grant. From my view, I just don't think that John Salley understands or understood who Michael Jordan was. Michael Jordan was someone who was always trying to find an edge. It didn't mean that he wasn't your friend or that he wasn't being sincerely friendly. But if he could find out some information about the protocol of your team or the overall paradigm that you utilized in becoming a success, he would subject himself to being around you for the sake of learning how you did what you did, to try to make himself a better version of himself. So anyway, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
Since we're strolling down memory lane, I want to show you a portion of former bad boy John Salley's interview with Vlad TV, where he downplays how contentious the rivalry was between your Bulls, Scottie, and the Pistons back in the late 80s and early 90s. Let's take a listen.
He loved everything about us in Detroit. Right. He was on fire. Now this is my home. My first TV show, the John Salley Show. Michael comes. I go pick him up from the hotel at night.
And if you watch this interview with Vlad TV that John Salley gave, he says a lot of very interesting things about his relationship with Jordan. He also states that they quote unquote rode the goat together. That being that they engaged in a lot of the Luciferian Masonic rituals that were required to rise up through the levels of their Masonic coven that they call Omega Psi Phi, one of the quote-unquote Divine Nine black fraternities or Boule fraternities.
Bring him back to my set to shoot it, get him some food, and bring him back to the hotel. I would trade my tickets with Scottie and Horace because they had people in Detroit, and then they would give me 2 tickets when I went to Chicago. Like, outside, right now, LeBron and them, you see it. We had the same things, people you were cool with.
So, Scottie, do you agree with Salley's take? And is the hatred between the players in your era a little overblown?
I don't agree with nothing, Sally. Let's put that out on the table right now. But I think that it was different. I think when I look at today, these players have relationships that they build and bond over years. I think in the NBA, when you look at the players in the 80 and 90, our relationship on the court between the lines were not like players of today.
Right.
And if it was, we didn't show it.
Yo, this dude is so bugged out, LeBron James. Something wrong with him for real.
Had that respect that we were representing our team and whatever, so there was no love out on the basketball court. I don't agree with what Salley is saying, that we had a relationship. No, yeah, if I call over to your locker room and ask you got 2 extra tickets, that don't really mean I like you. I got somebody outside trying to get in to watch me kick your butt.
And beyond that, John Salley, for those of you who don't know, back in the 1980s and 1990s, John Salley was trying to become a real comedian. Instead of him trying to put forth this notion that he was friends with Scottie Pippen and Horace Grant, he really should have been asking himself the question of all the players in the Pistons locker room, why did they feel the most comfortable coming to me for the tickets? It's obviously because they took you the least seriously of any other player in that locker room.
That's what that meant. And I've traded tickets with numerous of players around the league, but when it comes down between the lines, there were no relationships.
Well, I think a lot of that stems from, as you kind of alluded to, is guys now, they know each other and played AAU against each other since they were little kids. So by the time they get to the NBA, they've been around each other for a decade, basically.
Yeah. You know, and a lot of them now are...
You guys met each other there in the NBA.
Yes. A lot of players now are training all summer together, so these relationships in today's game are much deeper. They're communicating through social media, so I don't know what Salley is saying.
Scottie, that's good for the league, though?
Because I wasn't texting him.
Right. Well, there was no texting back then anyway.
Scottie's trying to make it very clear. And let me say this while I'm at it. It's very clear for those of us who've seen many of Scottie Pippen's interviews over the past few years, whenever he speaks about the bad boy Pistons, that he has a far more fervent hatred for that team than any other player that was on the Bulls in that time period of the late 80s into the early 90s. Even Michael. I think Michael has moved on. Of course, he still feels a certain way. I think that he's too stately to put forth those sentiments on camera. Scottie don't give a shit. That's why I state it's very obvious to me that the Pistons most likely played some very intense mind games with Scottie Pippen, because they realized that if they took Scottie out of the game, it would leave Jordan all to himself. And in Jordan's developmental stages in the late 80s, early 90s, you could take him out of the game by making him believe that he could only trust himself. That's why it was so pivotal, some of the moments that he had in the 1991 playoff run, when he understood that the only way that he would be able to rise to an even higher level as a player is when he learned to divest some of his power over to his teammates.
Do you think it's good for the league and good for the product that all these guys know each other, and there is that narrative that guys really don't have a hatred for one another like they might have in the 80s and 90s?
I think it's more advantageous for players today because, once again, the masculine principle in today's society is not as accentuated, is not as respected. So for a lot of these guys to be buddy-buddy off the court, it's definitely more lucrative for them because they're all going to travel to China and travel to Japan, travel to the Philippines to try to sell their sneakers, their apparel, their endorsements, etc. We're all making money together. Back in the 1980s, those guys were getting paid $400,000, $500,000 a year. They went home to their house, snorted their line of coke, worked out for a couple hours in the morning. That was that. In today's NBA, these players are thinking like businessmen. So it's all business, it's never personal. You cannot allow a personal vendetta against a player to mess with your ability to make money and to optimize your earning potential. So it's just a very different environment today.
I love it. I mean, I didn't think that what happened in the 80s and 90s needed to happen. I like the way the game is today.
In other words, Scottie's saying, I got put through a lot of bullshit by some of these other teams that was not necessary, especially the bad boy Pistons. They could have won if they were truly the better team and they understood that they were the better team without the hijinks.
Like the relationships that the players have with each other, and it has helped grow the game. I mean, people see these relationships around the world. It's not just us seeing them, but it's globalizing our game, and these players are looked up and respected.
And exponentially multiplying their earning factor.
All over the world. And There's no reason for them to have hatred or to be fighting or trying to destroy each other's careers out on the basketball court.
Yep.
That was another shot at the bad boy Pistons, at Lambeer and Rodman and those guys, because they were trying to end careers out there, especially Lambeer. In the late 80s, that dude was trying to end people's careers, and not just Scottie's and Michael's. Lambeer grabbed Liebert in a chokehold, bent his back inward, and threw him down to the ground, man. Just crazy shit.
For sure.
But anyway, that's basically it on that, brothers. Peace.